The fluorescent lights of Pete's diner flickered as Will Gardner wiped down the counter, his calloused hands moving mechanically over the worn laminate surface. Midnight had come and gone, and his 12-hour shift was finally ending. His shoulders ached from the long day, but his mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow's bills and his daughter's upcoming science project. "Need anything else before I cash out, Donnie?" Will called to the cook who was scrubbing down the grill. "Nah, man. Get home to Lily." "Tell the squirt I said hi." Will smiled at the mention of his 8-year-old daughter. She was the bright spot in his exhausting life, the reason he worked these grueling hours at the diner during the day and picked up handyman jobs whenever he could squeeze them in. As he hung up his apron, the bell above the door jingled. Will stifled a groan. Late-night customers were never good news. A woman stepped in from the pouring rain, her blonde hair darkened with moisture clinging to her face. Despite her soaked appearance, there was something striking about her, a natural elegance that seemed at odds with Pete's worn vinyl booths and chipped coffee mugs. "Sorry," Will said. "Kitchen's closed." The woman's eyes, a startling shade of green, met his. "Just looking for shelter from the storm." "My car broke down about a block away." Will hesitated. He needed to get home to relieve Mrs. Patel, their elderly neighbor who watched Lily after school until he got home, but something about the woman's lost expression tugged at him. "I can call you a tow," he offered, reaching for the phone. "I already called my service, but they said it'll be at least an hour." She gestured to the torrential downpour outside. "Mind if I wait here?" Donnie had already disappeared into the back, and Will knew Pete wouldn't appreciate him leaving a stranger alone in the diner. "I'm actually heading out," he said, "but there's a 24-hour convenience store 2 blocks down that way." He pointed east. The woman nodded, but when she turned back toward the door, her shoulders slumped slightly. Will felt a pang of guilt watching her prepare to head back into the downpour. "Look," he found himself saying, "I live about 15 minutes from here. I could walk you home and you could wait there for your tow. It's dry, at least." The offer surprised even him. Will wasn't in the habit of inviting strangers to his modest apartment, but something about this woman seemed trustworthy. Or maybe he was just too tired to think straight. "That's incredibly kind," she said with a grateful smile. "I'm Paige, by the way, Paige Reynolds. Will Gardner." He grabbed his jacket and umbrella. "Fair warning, I've got an 8-year-old daughter who might be asleep, but knowing her, she's probably negotiating 5 more minutes of reading time with my neighbor." Paige's smile brightened. "I love kids. I promise not to be a bother." They stepped out into the rain, huddling close under Will's umbrella. The storm had emptied the streets, and their footsteps echoed on the wet pavement as they made their way through the sleeping neighborhood. "So you work at the diner?" Paige asked, her arm occasionally brushing against his as they navigated puddles. "Manager. Been there 6 years now." Will didn't mention that he'd once had bigger dreams, an architecture degree he never finished after his wife died and left him a single father to a baby girl. "And you're raising your daughter alone?" "Yeah, it's just me and Lily." Will stepped around a particularly deep puddle. "Her mom passed away when she was a baby." "I'm so sorry," Paige said, and the genuine warmth in her voice made Will glance at her. Most people responded with awkward platitudes. "What about you?" he asked, eager to shift the conversation. "What brings you out in a storm at this hour?" Paige hesitated. "I was driving back from a late meeting. I work in finance." Will nodded, not missing her slight pause. He had the sense she was simplifying whatever she did. Probably some high-powered job with a title he wouldn't understand. "Here we are," he said as they approached his building, a modest 4-story walk-up that had seen better days. "Nothing fancy, but it's home." Paige followed him up 3 flights of stairs, their footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. When Will unlocked his door, Mrs. Patel greeted him with relief. "She just fell asleep 20 minutes ago," the older woman whispered, eyeing Paige curiously. "Insisted on waiting up for you." Will thanked Mrs. Patel and saw her to the door. When he returned to the living room, he found Paige studying the space with interest, taking in the mismatched furniture, the walls covered with Lily's artwork, and the stack of library books on the coffee table. "Sorry for the mess," Will said, suddenly self-conscious of the cramped apartment. "Can I get you some tea while you wait for the tow truck?" "That would be lovely," Paige replied, settling onto the worn sofa. You have a beautiful home. Will almost laughed at that. Beautiful wasn't the word most people would use for his modest apartment. But looking around through her eyes, he saw the warmth in the space, the evidence of love and life that filled every corner. As Will prepared the tea, he found himself wondering about Paige Reynolds. Despite her rain-soaked appearance, there was something polished about her. Her watch alone probably cost more than his monthly rent, yet she seemed completely at ease in his humble apartment, admiring Lily's drawings with genuine interest. "This one's my favorite," she said when he returned with 2 steaming mugs. She was pointing to a crayon drawing of Will and Lily holding hands beside what was supposed to be their apartment building. "Lily's quite the artist," he said with fatherly pride. "Wants to be an architect or an astronaut, depending on the day," Paige smiled. "Dream big or go home, right? That's what I tell her." Will settled into the armchair across from her. "So finance, huh? What exactly do you do?" For a moment, Paige looked uncomfortable. "I run an investment firm," she said finally. "Reynolds Financial Group." Will nearly choked on his tea. Even he had heard of Reynolds Financial. It managed billions in assets and was regularly featured in business news. "You're that Paige Reynolds?" he asked incredulously. She nodded, looking almost apologetic. "I don't usually lead with that information. I can imagine." Will was struggling to process this revelation. He'd invited a millionaire, probably a billionaire, to his cramped apartment with the leaky faucet and second-hand furniture. "This is good tea," Paige said, clearly trying to move past the awkward moment. Will couldn't help but laugh. "It's grocery store brand in a chipped mug, but thanks for being polite about it." Paige's expression grew serious. "I'm not being polite, Will. This is the best tea I've had in ages, because someone kind made it for me without expecting anything in return." There was something in her eyes, a loneliness that resonated with Will. He understood what it was like to be surrounded by people, yet feel completely alone. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a text. Paige's tow service was waiting at Pete's Diner. "Your chariot awaits," he said, holding up the phone. "I can walk you back." "Thank you," she said, rising reluctantly, "for everything." Will grabbed his jacket again, but before they left, he checked on Lily. She was fast asleep, her dark curls spread across her pillow, one arm wrapped around her favorite stuffed rabbit. "She's beautiful," Paige whispered from the doorway. "She's my whole world," Will replied simply. The rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle as they walked back to the diner. Their conversation flowed more easily now, as if Paige's revelation had removed a barrier between them. When they reached Pete's, a sleek black car was waiting rather than a tow truck. "My driver," Paige explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "The car didn't actually break down. I just needed a break from my life for a bit." Will was surprised by her honesty. "So you chose Pete's Diner for your escape?" "I chose to follow my instincts," she corrected, looking at him intently. "And they led me to you." Before Will could process that statement, she reached into her purse and handed him a business card. "I'd love to see you again, Will. Properly, not because I'm pretending to be stranded." Will looked at the elegant card with its embossed lettering. "I'm not sure I fit into your world, Paige." Her smile was gentle but determined. "Maybe I'd like to fit into yours." With that, she squeezed his hand, climbed into the waiting car and disappeared into the night, leaving Will standing on the sidewalk, wondering if the entire encounter had been a dream. The next morning, Will was flipping pancakes for Lily, trying to convince himself that last night had actually happened. The business card on his counter was the only evidence of his strange encounter with Paige Reynolds. "Dad, you're burning the pancakes," Lily observed, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Sorry, Squirt. Got distracted." Will quickly salvaged the slightly overdone pancake and slid it onto her plate. "Is it about the pretty lady?" Lily asked innocently as she drowned her breakfast in syrup. Will nearly dropped the spatula. "What pretty lady?" "The one who was here last night. I wasn't really asleep." Lily grinned mischievously. "She smelled like flowers, and she was looking at your picture that I drew." "Eavesdropping is not cool, Lily Pad," Will admonished, though he couldn't help but smile at his daughter's perceptiveness. "Are you going to see her again?" Lily persisted, her big brown eyes curious. Will glanced at the business card. He'd been asking himself the same question all night. "I don't know, sweetie. She lives in a very different world than we do. But did you like her? The question was so simple, yet so complicated. Yeah, he admitted. I did. Lily nodded with the wisdom of an 8-year-old. Then you should call her. That's what people do when they like each other. Will laughed and ruffled her hair. When did you get so smart about these things? The question of whether to call Paige occupied Will's thoughts throughout his shift at the diner. By the time he was wiping down tables for the third time that day, Donnie had noticed his distraction. Earth to Will, the cook called, waving a spatula. You've been cleaning that same spot for 5 minutes. Will shook his head, trying to clear it. Sorry, just thinking. About that woman from last night, Donnie wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. It's not like that, Will protested, though he wasn't entirely sure what it was like. Sure. Donnie flipped a burger with expert precision. That's why you're walking around here looking like you've seen a ghost. A very pretty ghost, from what I saw. Will was saved from responding by the arrival of the afternoon rush, but as he took orders and served food, his mind kept returning to Paige's parting words. Maybe I'd like to fit into yours. By the time his shift ended, Will had made his decision. Sitting in the break room, he pulled out his phone and dialed the number on Paige's card, his heart pounding unreasonably fast. A professional-sounding assistant answered, and Will almost hung up, suddenly feeling foolish. But before he could, Paige came on the line. Will, she said, her voice warm with pleasure, I was hoping you'd call. Yeah, well, he cleared his throat, I thought maybe you'd like to get coffee sometime, or tea since you seem to like my grocery store brand. Paige laughed, the sound making his heart skip. I'd love that. Are you free tomorrow? They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop near Will's apartment. As he hung up, he wondered what exactly he was getting himself into. The following afternoon, Will found himself changing his shirt 3 times before settling on a simple blue button-down that Lily insisted made his eyes look extra blue, Dad. The coffee shop was a cozy neighborhood place where the baristas knew Will by name. He chose a quiet corner table and waited, his nerves increasing with each passing minute. When Paige walked in, several heads turned. She was striking in a simple white blouse and jeans, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. But what caught Will's attention was how different she looked from the rain-soaked woman who'd stumbled into Pete's diner. This was Paige Reynolds, CEO, confident and polished. Yet when she spotted him, her face lit up with the same genuine smile he remembered. You came, Will said as she sat across from him, immediately feeling foolish for stating the obvious. Of course I did, she replied, though I did have to reschedule a board meeting. Will winced. You didn't have to do that, I wanted to. Paige leaned forward, her green eyes intense. Will, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that night. Her directness caught him off guard. In his experience, people danced around their feelings, making you guess and wonder. Paige's honesty was refreshing but also intimidating. I've been thinking about you too, he admitted. But I'm not sure what this is. We're from completely different worlds, Paige, are we? She tilted her head. We're both just people trying to make connections that matter. Will gestured vaguely. You run a billion-dollar company. I manage a diner and can barely make rent some months. And that matters because it just does, Will insisted, though her question made him pause. People will talk. They'll wonder what you're doing with someone like me. Paige reached across the table and took his hand. Her touch was warm and firm. Let them talk. I'm more interested in what you and I might be doing together. The conversation flowed easily after that, as they discovered shared interests in classic films and hiking. Paige was refreshingly down to earth, asking about Lily and laughing at Will's stories of diner mishaps. So how did you end up running Reynolds Financial? Will asked eventually. Paige's expression grew more serious. My father started the company. I was supposed to just be a figurehead when he retired, the pretty face of the Reynolds brand while the men made the actual decisions. Her mouth curved in a slight smile. I had other ideas. I bet you did, Will said, admiring the determination in her eyes. It hasn't left much room for a personal life, she admitted. Hard to date when everyone either wants your money or is intimidated by your success. Will understood then why she'd been so drawn to their chance encounter. He'd treated her like a person, not a bank account or a business opportunity. Lily wants to know if you like board games. he said impulsively. Because if you do, she's challenged you to Monopoly, which is ironic given your day job. Paige's laughter filled the small coffee shop. I never turn down a challenge, especially one involving property acquisition. And just like that, Paige Reynolds entered their lives. What began as a Monopoly rematch, which Lily won, to Paige's theatrical dismay, turned into regular dinners at Will's apartment. Paige insisted on cooking, revealing a surprising talent for creating meals from whatever was in Will's modest pantry. 3 weeks after their coffee date, Will was washing dishes while Paige helped Lily with her science project, a model of the solar system that was taking over the living room. Neptune's too close to Uranus, Lily was saying seriously. That's a sentence I never thought I'd hear in my apartment, Will called from the kitchen, making Paige laugh. It felt normal, comfortable, the three of them working together in the small space. But later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Will voiced the concern that had been growing in his mind. Are you sure about this? He asked Paige as they sat on the couch, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. About what? She murmured. This, us. The whole package deal, me, Lily, this apartment, my job. Paige sat up to look at him directly. Will Gardner, are you trying to talk me out of dating you? I'm trying to be realistic, he said. I've seen how people look at us when we're out together. They're wondering what you're doing with the guy in the worn jeans and work boots. And I'm wondering how I got lucky enough to find a man who sees me, not my bank account. She touched his face gently. Do you know how rare that is? Will covered her hand with his. I just don't want you to wake up one day and realize you've made a mistake. The only mistake would be walking away from this because of what other people might think. Paige's eyes were serious. I'm falling for you, Will, for your kindness, your integrity, the way you raise your daughter. Not for what you do or don't have. Her words pierced straight to his heart. He pulled her closer and kissed her, trying to convey everything he couldn't find the words to say. As the weeks turned into months, Will and Paige navigated the challenges of merging their very different lives. She attended Lily's school play, cheering louder than anyone when Lily delivered her one line as Tree 2. He accompanied her to a charity gala, feeling out of place but proud to be by her side. It wasn't always smooth. Will struggled with allowing Paige to pay when they went out, his pride warring with practicality. Paige had to learn that her usual direct approach to problems, throwing money at them, wasn't always appreciated. Their first serious argument came when Paige, without consulting Will, paid off the medical bills that had been piling up since Lily's hospital stay for pneumonia the previous winter. You had no right, Will said, pacing the small kitchen while Lily was at a friend's house. Those were my responsibilities. They were crushing you, Paige countered. You've been working double shifts for months trying to pay them down. That's what parents do, Paige. They handle their responsibilities. And what about your responsibility to take care of yourself? She challenged. You're exhausted all the time. How does that help, Lily? Will ran a hand through his hair in frustration. You don't understand what it's like to have to choose between paying the electric bill and buying new shoes because your kid's feet won't stop growing. You're right, I don't, Paige said quietly, but I do understand what it's like to love someone and want to ease their burden. The word love hung in the air between them. Neither had said it yet, though Will had been feeling it for weeks. I'm not a charity case, he said finally, his voice softer. Paige stepped closer, taking his hands. No, you're the man I love, and if our situations were reversed, wouldn't you help me if you could? The question disarmed him. Of course he would, in a heartbeat. I need to be able to take care of my family, he said, the admission costing him. And you do, Paige assured him. In 1,000 ways every day, let this be one way I can take care of all of us. The compromise they eventually reached that Paige could help with extraordinary expenses, but day-to-day costs remained Will's domain, was the first of many as they built their relationship. 6 months after that rainy night at Pete's Diner, Paige suggested they take Lily to her lake house for the weekend. Will had been working particularly hard, picking up extra shifts to cover for a coworker's maternity leave, and Paige could see the fatigue in his eyes. The lake house turned out to be a stunning modernist structure of glass and wood on a private stretch of shoreline. Lily ran from room to room in excitement, while Will tried not to think about how many years of his salary it would take to afford a single window. That evening, after Lily had exhausted herself swimming and was fast asleep in her room, Will and Paige sat on the deck overlooking the moonlit water. "Lily wants to move here," Will said with a wry smile. "She's already planning where her books would go." Paige turned to him, her expression suddenly serious. "What about you?" "What about me what? Would you want to live here? With me?" She took a deep breath. "Will, I'm asking if you and Lily would consider moving in with me. Not necessarily here, we could find a place that feels right for all of us." Will stared at her, momentarily speechless. They'd been together less than a year, and while he'd never felt this way about anyone since Lily's mother, the prospect of combining their lives so completely was daunting. "That's a big step," he said finally. "I know." Paige reached for his hand. "But I love you and I love Lily. When I'm not with you both, my house feels empty, no matter how many rooms it has." Will looked out at the lake, gathering his thoughts. "I don't want Lily to get used to all this, the big houses, the fancy vacations, and then have it disappear if things don't work out between us." "Is that what you think will happen?" Paige asked quietly. "No," he admitted. "But I've learned to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." Paige moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "I understand being cautious, but at some point we have to trust what we've built together." Will turned to look into her eyes, seeing the same combination of strength and vulnerability that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "I love you," he said. "More than I thought possible after losing Lily's mom, but living together is about more than love. It's about shared values, compatible lifestyles. And you think ours aren't compatible?" There was a hint of hurt in her voice. "I think we've been navigating around our differences rather than addressing them head-on." Will took a deep breath. "Paige, you tip waiters more than I make in a day. You have a chef who meal preps for you. Your closet is bigger than Lily's entire bedroom. Those are just things, Will. They don't define me. Maybe not, but they are part of your life, a life I'm not sure I belong in." Paige was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "When I was 10, my parents lost everything. My father had made a bad investment, and suddenly we went from living in a mansion to a 2-bedroom apartment. For a year, my mom cleaned houses and my dad drove a delivery truck while trying to rebuild his business." Will listened, surprised. Paige rarely spoke about her childhood. "That year taught me what matters," she continued. "Not the house or the cars or the designer clothes. What mattered was that we were together. That my parents still laughed and loved each other, even when they were exhausted from working jobs they'd never imagined having." She turned to face him fully. "I've built back all the material things and more, but I've never forgotten that they can disappear overnight. What can't disappear is what we feel for each other if we don't let fear push us apart." Will pulled her close, humbled by her story and the emotion behind it. "I'm not afraid of loving you," he whispered against her hair. "I'm afraid of changing Lily's life and then having her hurt if it doesn't work out." Paige pulled back to look at him. "Then let's make sure it works out. Let's build something together that lasts." Her certainty was compelling, and in that moment, looking into her eyes with the moonlight reflecting off the lake behind her, Will knew what he wanted. "Yes," he said simply. "Let's build something together." The decision to blend their lives wasn't simple or immediate. Over the next few months, they looked at dozens of houses, trying to find one that felt right for all of them, a place that balanced Paige's desire for space and light with Will's need for a home that felt approachable and comfortable. They finally found it in a renovated farmhouse on 3 acres, just outside the city, close enough for Paige's commute, but with room for Lily to explore and for Will to build the workshop he'd always dreamed of having. Moving day arrived on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after their chance meeting at Pete's Diner. As the movers carried in the last of the boxes, Will found Paige standing in what would be their bedroom, looking out at the property with a soft smile, having second thoughts. He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him. "Just the opposite. I was thinking how right this feels." Will understood exactly what she meant. Despite the vastly different paths that had led them here, being together felt inevitable somehow, as if they'd been moving toward each other their entire lives. "Dad, Paige, come see my room," Lily's excited voice echoed up the stairs. "I've decided where everything goes." They found her directing the movers with authority, pointing to precisely where her bed and bookshelf should be positioned. "Future CEO material right there," Paige whispered to Will, who nodded proudly. Later that night, after Lily had finally fallen asleep in her new room and the house had settled into quiet, Will and Paige sat on the porch swing, looking up at the stars. "I have something for you," Will said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not grand or expensive, but it means a lot to me." He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a simple silver ring with a modest diamond, his grandmother's engagement ring that had been tucked away in a safety deposit box since his mother had given it to him years ago. "Will," Paige breathed, her eyes widening. "I know we've only known each other a year," he said, taking the ring from the box. "But I also know that what we have is rare and real. You walked into that diner and changed everything, Paige. You really saw me when I felt invisible to the world." Tears glistened in Paige's eyes as he continued. "I love you for your strength, your compassion, the way you make Lily laugh. I love how you fight for what matters and never apologize for your success. And I want to spend the rest of my life building our family together." He took a deep breath. "Paige Reynolds, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation, holding out her trembling hand. "1,000 times yes." As Will slipped the ring onto her finger, Paige laughed through her tears. "It fits perfectly." "Just like us," Will said, drawing her close for a kiss that felt like coming home. 5 years later, Dad." "They're here," Lily called, her 13-year-old voice carrying through the house as she peered out the front window. Will wiped his hands on a dish towel and headed for the door. Outside, his parents were climbing out of their car, his father already reaching into the back seat for 3-year-old Emma, who was squirming with excitement. "Grandpa," Emma squealed as the older man lifted her out. Will stepped onto the porch, watching his father set Emma down and laugh as she ran straight for the tire swing that hung from the oak tree in the front yard. "Careful, Em," he called, though he knew his youngest was fearless. As his parents made their way to the house with their overnight bags, Will felt Paige slip her arm around his waist. "Your mom brought another casserole," she observed with amusement. "She still thinks we can't cook," Will said with a chuckle. "Well, you couldn't when I met you," Paige teased, squeezing his side. Their comfortable banter was interrupted by Emma's delighted shriek as Lily pushed her on the swing. The sight of his daughters together, Lily so patient with her little sister, Emma so full of joy, filled Will with contentment so deep it almost hurt. 5 years had brought many changes. Will had finally completed his architecture degree and now ran a small but successful home renovation business. Paige had restructured Reynolds Financial to allow her to work fewer hours while maintaining the company's success. They'd welcomed Emma into their family 2 years after getting married, completing their circle in a way none of them had expected. "I still can't believe this is our life sometimes," Will said quietly as they watched their family. Paige rested her head against his shoulder. "Really? Because I knew from that first rainy night that we were meant to find each other." Will turned to look at her, still struck by her beauty and the depth of feeling in her eyes when she looked at him. "Even when I was just a struggling diner manager offering to walk you home. Especially then," Paige said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "That's when I started falling, and I haven't stopped since." As their family gathered on the porch, Emma racing up the steps, Lily discussing her science project with her grandmother, Will's father clapping him on the shoulder, Will reflected on the strange, wonderful journey that had brought them here. A chance encounter on a rainy night. A walk home. A connection neither of them had been looking for, but both had desperately needed. And now, this beautiful life they'd built together, proving that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings led to the most perfect endings.